The 90s were quite a different time, and very cherished by everyone who lived through them. Some of the most beloved entertainment properties ever created were delivered during this time, including my favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy VII. When it released back in 1997, the ESRB gave it a T rating, for 13 years and older. Despite some of its content being suggestive, it was very animated and non-realistic, and it kept this from ever being any sort of problem. In fact, when the game was first released on PlayStation 1, the ESRB's content rating only claims that it has comic mischief, animated violence, and mild language. Looking at its most recent release, this has now become blood, fantasy violence, language, and mild suggestive themes. The way in which people perceive content has changed a lot now, and though sometimes sparking controversy, these mature and dark themes are what help build the congruence of Final Fantasy VII's world with the circumstances at hand. But introducing these concepts again, and by today's graphical standards, it could be quite a problem. And this is a great concern, because it could lead to several attempts to tone down much of the content that made the game's story so great originally. But it goes much deeper than toning it down. Some things would have to be outright completely rewritten in order to work, and many story beats could potentially lose their entire intention. For this reason, I propose that Final Fantasy VII absolutely must be an M-rated game, in order to preserve the authenticity of the game's world and story. Oh, and Tifa. We'll be talking a lot about Tifa today, as apparently that's a thing. There are thousands of examples here, enough to make an hour-plus video with. It's almost impossible to go through all of it, so I just want to highlight some of the early game stuff. So let's start with the one that everyone is most concerned about, the events of Woolmarket and Don Corneo. Under the impression that Tifa has been kidnapped by the crime lord, Cloud and Aerith seek to find their way into the mansion in order to save her, when they discover that only beautiful women are let in, meaning that Cloud, as pretty as he is, his shoulders end up being a little too broad for their taste. While of course they will let Aerith in because who in their right mind wouldn't? Cloud refuses to let her go alone, considering the type of guys that would be in a creepy place like this. Aerith, having read too many weird shoujo mangas in her day, gets the idea to dress Cloud up like a girl. And if you've never played Final Fantasy VII before, yes, this is actually a vital canon part of the game's main scenario. And it's already been confirmed to be in the remake, with them saying, please look forward to it. Even the concept of this scenario is extremely edgy for a 13+ rated piece of content in a modern game. And that's before we even get into the events that are happening, though it's also where a lot of the game's great humor takes place. But there's so many things here that just could not work in a T-rated game. For example, the room where you find Tifa. This whole room is just, you guys know what this room is supposed to be. You cannot do that in a teen-rated game. Then there's how these guys act toward Cloud, and I don't work for the ESRB, but that's probably a boundary cross somewhere. Not to mention the threats that they make toward the Don's materia, but it is some of the most iconic humor in the game, and it would be incredibly disappointing to see that go away. But in all honesty, that scene is still not really the most worrisome thing. Do you remember when Red 13, or rather his true name Nanaki, was first introduced? He and Aerith were trapped into a transparent chamber together by Professor Hojo, with his idea of producing a hybrid specimen. And you know, with Shinra budget cuts and hours being slashed in half, he didn't have the staff on hand to fool with any of that test tube stuff. They were going to produce this hybrid directly, and Hojo, being Hojo, was going to watch the whole thing. How in the world are they going to remake this game? And because this is an important part of the scenario, it would again require massive rewrites to get around. It's one of your first introductions to Professor Hojo, and you learn just how twisted this guy is. To remove this scene would be to remove a fundamental demonstration of Hojo's character, or lack of character, as it so perfectly demonstrates just how messed up this guy is. Oh, and then there's the Honeybee Inn. There's just a lot of stuff here that's just not going to fit the PG-13 bill either. Some people believe this entire area could potentially be cut from Final Fantasy VII Remake, although I would be outraged if they did. But this notorious scene where Cloud encounters some very friendly gentleman, and they all have a wonderful bubble bath together. Yeah man, they're just all really good friends. And there's pretty much no way to show this in a toned down way. But even aside from these concepts, there's actually a limit of blood you're allowed to show in a T-rated game before it actually begins to slip into M-rated territory. This is also part of the reason why Final Fantasy Type 0 was slapped with an M rating. That means the entire scene in the Shinra building, where you awaken to find a blood trail alongside several bodies, might have to be entirely reworked if Square Enix wants to maintain a T rating. This scene is like something straight out of a Resident Evil game, and it is an absolute pivotal moment in the game, and is one of the most shocking and impactful scenes that the game has to offer. While it was okay to do in the original game and maintain its teen rating, the level of graphical expression that will be presented now is insanely detailed, and it will call all of this into question. There's also Sid Highwind and Barrett Wallace, and their incredibly crude ways of talking. You're allowed a little bit of profanity in teen-rated games, but part of me just wants to see them unfiltered. Then people are worried about things that they just shouldn't be worried about, like Tifa being nerfed, for lack of a better word. Which is almost a ridiculous notion if you think about it. First of all, there's nothing about canon, official Tifa that is remotely worth censoring, even with Sony's censorship policy. Which, by the way, that policy is a very serious issue. I very much condemn it, and I wish they would remove it outright. And yes, it is affecting a number of games, but there's nothing about that policy that would even come close to applying to Tifa. There's just nothing inherently wrong with the way Tifa is presented to make her worthy of changes. I mean, for starters, her outfit is the same as Misty's from Pokemon. But even then, have you played Final Fantasy 15? Have you seen Shiva? Or Aranea? Or Cindy? And ironically, they did actually receive some pressure on Cindy, and still they did not change her. I tried to find anyone with a serious platform hoping for changes to Tifa, and I didn't find a single thing, which means nobody with any sort of following or any influence is actually pushing for that. But also, have you guys played Nier Automata? I'm gonna go off on a limb and say the stellar combat was the second thing that caught your eye about the game before buying it. Dragon Quest XI and the Puff Puff side quest? That stuff was usually removed in the Western releases of Dragon Quest, but in Dragon Quest XI they decided to end that entirely. So if anything, Square Enix is loosening up on that sort of thing. And I keep saying canon Tifa because a quick Google search will reveal a lot of fan art that is quite different from Nomura's artwork. So no, you won't get your 20 plus years of fan art worth of Tifa made into the game's canon. But you will get a Tifa Lockhart in her prime, and probably be her best appearance yet. Final Fantasy VII was a truly magnificent story, and it would be impossible for it to maintain the exact same story and maintain the rating that it had back then. Because of this, I believe the right thing for Square Enix to do is to go ahead and make Final Fantasy VII Remake an M-rated game, so that it can preserve its sensibilities and its story to the fullest, without having to worry about toning down its original humor and dark methods of storytelling. With that said, Ultima Weapons, I want to know, do you think they can get away with making the game T-rated again? Or do you just not fancy rating systems at all? Subscribe, click the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. And if you've been enjoying my content, be sure to check out the Patreon for the Night Sky Prince, like my awesome supporter, Sean Mayer. Sean is helping me keep the channel going and growing. A very big thank you, Sean. Shout out to him and the rest of the Ultima community.